The other day, I was perusing Twitter when this tweet came across my feed. Sammy Rhodes said, "Kesha is what would happen if Comic Sans came to life." I stopped and gave it a good laugh because, hey, it's pretty funny, right? So that's when I stopped and searched everything that was tagged Comic Sans. Morgan McCoy said, "Sorry, but I think I have to drop your class for typing the syllabus in Comic Sans." Creative Mornings provided support for Comic Sans criminals. What I've come up with is people all around the world hate Comic Sans just as much as I do, and have even made support groups, like this one, for helping people deal with their inappropriate usage of this horrible typeface. And then I saw this tweet. What if the only font to exist was Comic Sans? My heart stopped, and I felt sick because I know, and I hope that you feel like it would basically be the end of the world if this were to happen. But for me, I know I hate Comic Sans, but other people don't. So why is it that I hate Comic Sans, yet there's a small percentage of people that could probably care less? The answer? Aesthetics. After exploring the arts area of knowledge, I was introduced to an interesting concept that made me think. The concept is this. We hold true the idea that there should be standards for judging art. From this, I was introduced to a knowledge issue that perplexed me. How do we know what principles should be used to judge art? To go about answering this question, it's important to understand what is considered art, and why is it important to judge art? From the start, it's obvious that the reason we judge art is in order to define art. If we don't hold standards for what art is, everything could be considered art. Considering that anything you create could be considered art. If there were no standards, we would be written in a world where people think that crayon scribbles is art. But what if it is art? Without principles, everything would be considered art. Being an artist is an acclaimed profession in modern society. Take this Jackson Pollock work, for example. It was sold for $140 million, whereas this scribble is your daughter's kindergarten project. That's worth nothing, respectively. But hey, that's modern art for you. It's all about the debate of I could do that versus yeah, but you didn't. This brings up another question. Should art be made for creation or appreciation? If art is made purely for creation, and the process of creating art is more important, then it's irrelevant to have standards to judge art. However, if art is made for sharing on a global basis, it's important to have principles to define art. But what principles should we use? Aesthetics, you say? But here's the problem. How do we judge art based on aesthetic principles when aesthetic principles cannot be defined? The everlasting debate between Comic Sans and Helvetica is a good example of this. Many would argue that Comic Sans is hated so incredibly much because of its aesthetic appeal in comparison to other more aesthetic fonts like Helvetica. In fact, some designers even cringe at the sight or usage of Comic Sans. But what makes Helvetica so much nicer? Many say that Helvetica's versatility is the reason why it's so popular. YouTube users have made countless videos explaining why they love Helvetica, but they hate Comic Sans. In the end, it always ends with the same word, aesthetics. So we've thrown this word around a lot, but what really is aesthetics? First, according to dictionary definitions, aesthetics is defined as pleasing in appearance, or the philosophy of dealing with notions of beauty, even a criteria for judging art, and the study of the mind and emotions in terms of beauty. Is it fair to say that aesthetics is the single most important criteria for judging art? Secondly, from a different perspective, in DP art class, art is judged from basic criteria developed by IB. Concepts such as understanding of ideas and techniques, and appropriate use of materials, inventiveness, and expression are all principles outlined in the criteria. From a third perspective, we can look at things from a philosophical approach. Plato explained that beauty is based on what you love. Aristotle believed that to be beautiful, a living creature and every whole must be made of a certain arrangement of parts, and explained that the arrangement of these parts could be boiled down to a mathematical formula. like the golden section. Beauty is math? Golden ratio explains beauty in shapes, and that beauty can be used and defined by a numerical relationship of proportions and symmetry. Another philosopher, Plotinus, said that beauty was defined by integral parts of a coherent whole as perfect as unity or as the principle of unity itself. Darwin's theory suggests that beauty is defined by natural selection. Survival of the fittest and the most desirable is the only way to define beauty in the natural world, where beauty is explained through functionality and a mating partner and successful reproduction rather than visual beauty. Therefore, using Darwin's reasoning, rather than being judged by appearance, it's thought that art should be based on its ability to fulfill its purpose and be functional in expression. Ananda Kumaraswamy, a British scholar of medieval arts, explains that a true work of art should be based on whether it's truly well made and whether it expresses and serves a purpose. Aesthetics is not the same thing as beauty, and therefore art should not be judged by beauty, but rather a series of guidelines. From a fourth perspective, I took into consideration psychology as an area of knowledge. From a psychological perspective, when considering the social and cultural level of analysis, art cannot be judged by aesthetics. Aesthetics was derived of the concept of taste during the Renaissance, where the upper class defined what fine taste was, and anything else would be considered ugly. From a different perspective, cultural influences could influence the way we perceive art. After all, something that's seen as beautiful in particular cultures is not always beautiful on a global basis. People raised in different environments will view beauty in art in many different ways. Additionally, some people have dark senses and find beauty in things that are not usually perceived as beautiful, like death, darkness, and disease. Finally, from a fifth perspective, my own personal experience with art. This past summer, I had the opportunity to visit Dia Beacon, a modern museum featuring structural pieces based on light. As we were touring, we entered a room that was a series of white walls, and when one of my peers shouted out that this was not art, and in fact it was a disgrace to art, I sat there and considered this. Why was a room with white walls considered art? Our guide continued to lie down on the floor and stared at the wall from a different angle. He explained that if you laid there at 3 p.m. in the winter, you would see the most magical painting you've ever seen before. The colors of the sunset would reflect on the window onto the white canvas of the bare walls. He asked if this painting is more beautiful when you know it's made by Van Gogh and look it up on the internet, or you can sit in this room for any hour of the day and see something new for the rest of your life. The girl was silenced for the remainder of the tour. This tour made me think differently about art, because sure enough, the next day I found myself at MoMA staring at Starry Night by Van Gogh, trying to assess beauty. Considering all of these perspectives, I can attempt to conclude a set of general principles to judge art. Considering the idea that individuals develop their own definition of aesthetics that are based off of social settings and simple design concepts, it's nearly impossible to set one form of criteria. In general, I can conclude that aesthetics can be defined as a cohesive piece that provokes expression and fulfills a purpose,